Okay. So hi, everyone. Thank you for coming to our workshop this afternoon. I just wanted to start off with introducing myself and the other tutors presenting this workshop today. So my name is Victoria. I'm an English major here at Centenary. I'd also like to introduce Amanda, who's dual majoring in criminal justice and political and governmental affairs, Emily, who's a film and theater major, and Francesca, who is an education major. We're all peer tutors at the Writing Collaboratory. And today we're going to talk about subjective and fact-based writing, which Amanda is going to explain what that really means between the two.
Okay, so essentially objective or fact-based writing, so you can call it, sometimes it's referred to as either or, typically sticks to facts and figures, and it's typically used strictly to inform the audience of something. Because it's meant to be unbiased, it's not usually influenced by personal feelings or opinions. It can also be found in textbooks and news reports, so you have to be careful with that because, as we know, the media can be kind of biased, and sometimes textbooks can as well. So it has to be sort of relevant to the time now. And then subjective writing, which is also considered like opinionated writing, is often found in personal essays, autobiographies, and in editorial sections of newspapers. And that's where journalists typically express their opinions about news events or things that are happening. And this tends to be a more biased form of writing, as it clearly presents a specific viewpoint, although it doesn't have to be biased just to be opinionated. So then just to kind of break it down even further, a fact is a statement that can be proven true or false, and it's typically backed up by evidence. So facts are used in objective writing. An opinion is an expression of a person's feelings that can't necessarily be proven. Opinions can be based on facts or emotions, and sometimes they're meant to deliberately mislead others, which you kind of see in like mainstream media sometimes, where headlines can be very kind of persuasive to make you think one thing, even if the article is not necessarily about that. So that makes it important to be really aware of what the author's purpose is in their writing itself, in the articles they're writing or whatever it is that you're reading, and the choice of language that they use. So sometimes you have to realize that the author is letting the facts speak for themselves. They're not always going to put the facts out there, but they're kind of under the kind of hidden in there. So opinions are typically used in subjective writing, as I said. So then a couple examples of facts versus opinions would be, we have a couple statements here. So this one's a fact. It would be, with fewer cars on the road, there would be less air pollution and traffic noise. Therefore, the use of mass transportation should be encouraged. And you can see here the author is using descriptive language to appeal to your emotions and sway your thinking, but they're still using facts to do that. So that makes it more objective than subjective. And then for an opinion, you would see it phrased more like, looking at a smoggy view from a congested highway, how do you feel about fighting road hugs and bumper to bumper traffic every day? Mass transportation is a solution to all these problems. So they're giving you an opinion saying that mass transportation would fix all of these things and kind of making you feel a certain way by bringing up things that typical people don't enjoy when they're driving on a highway. So it's just a couple of examples.
So subjective writing focuses on like the attitudes, values, thoughts, feelings, or beliefs of the person who's doing the writing and speaking. It normally would reveal like the perspective or the interpretation that the writer has, and it may not accurately describe the traits of the object. And the message of like subjective language cannot be proven or measured, so it's more of an that's why it's more of an opinion than a fact. It normally has like different like judgments and interpretations and stuff, which like you can see for instance, in the example that Amanda just showed, like they used actual like facts about traffic patterns and things like that, rather than talking about like smoggy airways, which could be more of a subjective and opinionated thing. These are just some of the words that like might be included for someone who's using subjective language. Some of them being delicious, interesting, misguided, uninspiring, or horrible. Some of these words, like for instance with delicious, you can clearly use in different circumstances that would show like an opinion rather than a fact. So like if you were to say like chocolate chip cookies are delicious, some people might not think that. So then that you can see that it's more of an opinion than an actual fact. You'll most commonly find subjective information in newspaper editorials, blogs, and comments on the internet. If something is subjective, it's not necessarily suitable for making a decision or reporting in the news. Unfortunately, like Amanda was saying, that sometimes a lot of the news today like is more subjective than it is objective, or they'll take like slight facts and then twist them so it makes it more subjective. But a lot of the times, like, you can't use subjective based writing for decision making and reporting.
Okay, and then on the other hand, objective writing focuses on making a point to a reader through just straight facts. It does not rely on individual perspective or bias. It instead considers both sides of a given argument and only makes statements when there is enough evidence to back them up. So the message of objective writing can and should be proven or measured, and this kind of language is free from judgments, interpretations, evaluations, or opinions. And then some vocabulary that exemplifies objective writing should not include descriptive words such as some or very, because that's more so subjective. It can be opinionated. So vocabulary in objective writing should be explicit. It should not be used to embellish a sentence. Rather, it should be used to aid in delivering facts in a straightforward manner.
Sorry, I was muted. So if you're taking a literature class, I'm saying that from the perspective of an English major, but you want to be partially subjective, and you're kind of formulating an argument that's based on your own opinion. So regardless if you're making like a claim about a particular theme or about a character, or any other argument related to the topic, or text at hand, it's going to be based on your opinions. But even though you're making an argument that is based on your opinions, in those instances, you still want to have some kind of evidence or support behind the claim that you're making. So this can obviously be presented in different ways. It can be direct quotes from the text that you're critically analyzing, or it can just be support from other scholarly work. Essentially, you're writing about your opinion, but it's supported by direct evidence from what it is that your opinion is about. So for example, that evidence can come from the specific text or video that your opinion is focusing on. But there are a few things to keep in mind when you're making arguments based on your opinions. You want to first definitely make ethical arguments, which really just means making arguments that are not biased or offensive, even if they're based on your own opinions. You also want to take the time to analyze multiple perspectives and viewpoints. And you want to try to respond to others' opinions as you make your argument. So you kind of want to think how people would counter your own argument that you're making. And you want to draw some kind of connection between similar works, topics, or ideas. So again, that's kind of what I was saying about like connecting to scholarly work or other things out there. And the last thing that you want to make sure you do is to clearly define and state your point of view. You want to be able to provide information as to how you came to formulate that opinion or your argument. And that doesn't necessarily have to be in the paper itself, although I think that's kind of what the paper is going to do. But you definitely want to be able, if someone asks, like how you came to that opinion. So how to transition from opinion to fact-based. When it comes to making your paper fact-based, you can find sources that have some kind of data connected to your argument. So if it's a scholarly article and it's making the same point that you want it to make with your opinion, you can actually use that to help support your argument and then kind of transfer it to being fact-based. And you would just basically include any information that you can from that source and citations. And this would just show readers that you're basing your argument on already existing facts. So this is just a little bit about genre conventions, and it's kind of a lot, but I just wanted to briefly touch on it because when it comes to fact-based writing, there usually is a little bit of genre conventions being used. And what I mean by genre conventions is that it's it's like elements that help identify and classify that kind of writing. So how it's identified as being fact-based. And the most important thing here is precision. So that's really like the key genre convention of fact-based writing. And that is the quality, condition, or fact of being exact and accurate. So the first thing that you want to consider is word choice. And what that really means is just avoiding words that may add confusion to your writing, or they just might make your writing too wordy. So some examples of words to try and avoid are will, may, must, and shall. And these words, when they're used, either force an action. So for example, like the word must, it implies that someone or something has to do something. Other words like would force a future action, or make something sound like it's optional. So for example, like you may do something, that's kind of like forcing an optional action on someone. And these words obviously don't apply to all writing or all instances, but it's just something to keep in mind when or if you do use these words in your writing. Just kind of think of the context that you're using them in and whether it makes sense for if you're using subjective or fact-based writing. So the second thing, this gets into the idea of like using vague words, which just means avoiding words that don't define what you're talking about. So this can be something like the girl or the problem, and this would leave like readers wondering what girl or what problem. So you really just want to be specific in defining what that girl, who that girl is, or what the problem is. And I mean, this is so. The kind of exception to this is if you've already stated the problem like a bunch of times in your paper, or you've already said the girl's name a bunch of time in your paper, or whatever it might be. It's okay to obviously change it up a bit and say like the problem as in referencing back, but you just want to make sure that the subject or the idea that you're referring to is stated clearly somewhere in your paper, and that it's clear to the reader what it is that you're talking about. So the next thing is word connotation, and that's really just avoiding words that can spark unintended emotions in readers. So the example here is like using the word cheap. It's often used negatively, so it's better to use words that are a little bit more neutral. So affordable is considered like a neutral term, just because it doesn't have anything like, it doesn't have any negative emotions or attitudes associated with it. And there are obviously a bunch more words that there typically are more neutral options, but that's just like one example of it. So the last thing is nominalizations. And that really just means like flipping around a sentence so that the action taken comes first before the object or the person. I know this is like a very technical thing because it's really focusing on like your sentence structure. But when you do set up sentences in a way that like the action is coming first before introducing who the subject is or like who's doing the action, it just makes your writing a little bit more wordy. I like to think of it as like talking like Yoda. That's kind of how it sounds a little bit. But the important thing in general with all of these like little conventions is that fact-based writing really just focuses on factual statements, and the idea is that they're precise in both the message and then how they're presented to the audience. So just really like avoiding additional words that might take away from the facts that you're trying to present in a paper, or even if it's just like a presentation or anything like that.
Okay, so then to get a little bit more specific as far as like when you would use objectivity in your writing, if you're in like for me as a criminal justice major, you talk a lot about like police reports, right? Or if you're a bio major, you might talk about lab reports. So when you're in specific occupations, sometimes you're going to have to use like really objective language in your reports. So like I said before, police officers and lab analysts have to be really careful to remain objective. And this is because you're supposed to just be reporting the facts and you're not supposed to be putting your own opinions in it. So there's, I think a little bit later, we talk about how you can kind of change your opinions into factual things by just changing the way you're reporting them. But the reason why they're really not good to keep in opinions don't really belong in report writing is because they can make your report look unprofessional. They cast doubt on your credibility, and they probably won't stand up in court. So that's something that, especially like when you're in this kind of field, you have to really make sure that you're not putting yourself into any kind of report. So that's also something that you can sort of relate to writing like a research paper for school, where there's ways, as we talked before, there's ways to express, depending on the language you use, there's ways to express what your opinions are, but by using facts to back that up. So you're not actually using your own opinion, you're kind of like proving it.
Okay, and then, so just as Amanda kind of talked about report writing, I thought maybe if someone was an education major, if they were like curious about how that kind of writing goes. And pretty much in that there's several different types of writing, but the two that are probably the most like prevalent are lesson plans and reflections. So with lesson plans, you kind of have to have these objectives and goals that are straightforward for students to achieve, as well as direct reference to some like Common Core state standards. So when you're writing that and you're writing the instruction, it's pretty straightforward, and there's really no room for opinion in that type of writing. But reflections, on the other hand, typically require a detailed look into personal experiences in the classroom. So for example, it might include like daily events in the classroom, and then that can kind of branch off into specific situations regarding students. So because reflections are specifically crafted by an individual, it kind of takes a personal sort of narrative viewpoint. So it would be subjective in that manner. And then just two general rules to kind of keep in mind when separating fact from opinion. So the first one would be that you don't document your thoughts or thinking processes. So you stick to what your five senses tell you. And another way to kind of say that is to be descriptive. So turn opinions such as, for example, like he seems scared into word pictures. So you would kind of describe that as his hands were shaking and his lips were trembling. He looked over his shoulder 5 times while I was questioning him. So you're kind of really kind of painting a picture.
Yeah, so what like Francesca just said is kind of how I was saying, like when you're doing a report, there's ways to make your opinions like to prove them. So to turn them into pictures, I think that's such a good way to explain that. But something that you want to remember is that emotional language is never right or wrong, but the way that it is used can be positive or negative. So it's up to you as a writer and as a reader to make a reasonable judgment about material you're reading and draw your own conclusion. And then when you're writing things, to do the same thing. So you don't want to just read something and accept it for being factual, because sometimes we read stuff and we think it seems legitimate, but it's not. So that's something that you always have to take that extra step if you're using things for your own reports and that kind of thing, or just to, your own general knowledge. You want to make sure that you're checking to see where's this coming from. Does the person have some kind of stake in the game? Like, is there something like behind just the words, right? So when you read, it's really important to judge facts and opinions carefully. So in order to you do that in order to come to the right conclusion. So you have to ask yourself, is what I'm reading reliable? Are the facts legitimate? Are the opinions based on the facts? Because sometimes we know people just come up with their own opinions based on things they believe in, and that's okay, but that doesn't mean that's something that you should be placing any bets on as far as, your own. You don't want to take somebody else's opinion and think that it's a fact. And then another thing is that some texts combine subjective writing with fact-based writing. So it's extra important to be able to differentiate between the two different kinds of writing. So, you see this, I think we see it more in like newspaper articles or articles on the internet where you're seeing, there are some facts, but there's also opinions. And sometimes we know, like with statistics, you can make statistics kind of prove whatever you want them to, right? The way you can kind of change and manipulate like how you're phrasing things. So it's just something to definitely keep in mind when you're reading things and when you're writing, that not everything is going to be just either fact-based or subjective. Now, I think I have to go back because apparently I missed a slide. So tell me when it is, guys. Or does anybody know the title of it?
Oh, you just passed it.
No.
But just to kind of transition into that, is that what Amanda's saying, like it can be subjective writing can be a positive thing. I think that's really what Emily is going to talk about here with subjective writing, is where it can be used positively.
Yeah, so one of the things I also wanted to really talk about with subjective writing, which is also, I think, a lot of the ways that you'll come across it, at least at Centenary, is in like, you can see it in response journals, weekly reflection journals, personal essays, and then like if you have a creative writing class or something along those lines, where like it's more required for things to be subjective writing. With the response journals and like weekly reflection things, those tend to be in classes where I know a lot of like art appreciation classes have them, like film appreciation. A lot of that is subjective writing. Not to say that you can't have like facts and stuff from whatever source your professor gave you, but a lot of that is based off of the material that was given to you and your own response to it.
Okay, so the activity that we have today is a Kahoot. I know that Isaiah, you're the only one that's here, but before we do get to the activity, does anyone have any questions or anything, whether that's subjective writing, fact-based writing, or even just the genre conventions or anything like that?
I actually do have a question.
Mhm.
Amanda had said like there was only like two like different types of subjective writings, and I was wondering if she could elaborate a little more on that.
So there's definitely more than two types of subjective writing. I'm wondering which slide you might be talking about, so I'm just going to go back here.
The last slide before I think it was the activity. I believe it was.
Okay. So this one?
Yes.
So there's not just two different kinds of subjective writing or fact-based writing. It's just that these are typically the two kinds of writing you're going to see. So you'll see some writing is just strictly fact-based, some is strictly opinion-based, if you want to call it opinion or subjective. And then you have certain writing that kind of combines the two together. So that's when you have to be careful to, if you're not sure, you can kind of tell this seems a little opinionated, but this seems factual. You have to, as a reader, kind of be able to understand that the author is using this technique. So you have to be careful not to just take everything, just because they have statistics in their paper, that doesn't mean that the entire paper is based off of facts. So that's basically what I'm saying, is that you just have to be really careful that, like the two questions on the slide, are the facts actually reliable, and are the opinions that they express based on facts? If not, it's still, you're still making yourself more aware of other people's opinions in their writing, but it's just important to understand the difference between something that is fact-based versus something that is based on somebody else's opinion. Does that answer what you were looking for, Isaiah?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
You're welcome. Did you have other questions?
Not at the moment, no.
I have a question for you guys. I'm not sure if this is the right moment to ask it. If you guys want to return to it later, you can. But I think that this is really important. I'm glad that you guys, wanted to do a workshop on this, because I find that a lot of times when I'm teaching like WRI 1001, and people are doing like their first paper for college, that there will be people who say, well, this is a topic that I know a lot about. And so I don't need like secondary research in order to support my claims. And so I'm just wondering, like, I feel like at that moment, they're afraid that their opinion doesn't matter in those kind of research-based papers. So what would your advice be to those folks, to the people that want to be able to, you know, incorporate their own opinion about something they're researching, but if they're writing in a genre that really requires that objective, like evidence?
So I think that kind of gets into maybe what I was saying about like still keeping your opinion, like starting with formulating your own argument, whether it's creating a thesis based on your own opinion. But then as you work, if you want to make a claim about something, I mean, I'm trying to think of like an example off the top of my head, but if you just want to say like, the sky is blue, like I know it's very basic, but you may have that as your opinion, and that's fine, but also finding maybe an article that just either supports that claim or goes a little bit deeper in it. So it's still your argument and it's still coming from what you originally thought, but it's okay to also just have something that supports it for an outside reader. I always try to, especially when I'm tutoring, just put it into perspective of, well, as an audience member, as someone reading this might be helpful if you were to do this, and that might be have other support, other scholarly work that's cited in your argument. So it's not just that your opinion doesn't matter, it does, but it's just that as an outside reader, they might want to see that. So I at least try to, I think, word it in that way. So it's still supporting their opinion and their view, but also trying to get it to be a little bit more objective and have facts in it.
Nice. Thanks.
Does anyone have any other questions? Okay. So for the activity, I did make a Kahoot. And it's just going over, so there's a couple of examples of fact-based writing, or if it's subjective writing, that's for you to decide when you see the examples. But and then there's also a question just about precision, like when you would use it and where you would use it. I don't know if you're able to click on the link, Amanda.
Let me know if you guys can't see my screen still. I might have shared it wrong.
Nope, we can see it.
When I do this,
Yeah, there should be a thing to play. And then you just click on classic. Okay, so if everyone goes to kahoot.it, you just have to type in that game pin on the screen that pops up, and then it just enters you right into the game.
Do you want to put that in the chat just so people can see it?
Yes.
Sorry if you hear somebody cracking up in my background. My sister is enjoying something in the kitchen.
If anyone is having a hard time getting in, just let me know.
Well, you guys should play too. I can't play, right? Because I'm on this.
You can play it on your phone.
Isaiah, do you know how to get in there?
Yeah, I'm good now.
Okay. Okay, is that everybody?
I think so. Okay.
Okay.
Yep. Just hit start.
Have the power.
So is this statement below an example of subjective or fact-based writing? It says, according to Margaret Talbot, the opioid crisis became considered an epidemic in the 1990s after chronic pain treatment was advocated for, particularly to treat less common chronic pain conditions. And there is a citation, Davies 2017 at the end. Woohoo. So this says, if Nixon hadn't targeted people of color with his policies and reform of the police drug complex, then the opioid epidemic would most likely be less of a social problem than it had become during the 1990s.
Everybody's good at this game.
So this says, ultimately, I feel that opioid abusers can change their community and more people are aware of the epidemic because gangs, drugs, houses, and exchanges are more prevalent in their communities. And it says this type of negative presence in communities makes the epidemic a social problem. So before you move on, the reason that it's subjective is just because it's saying like, ultimately, they're also just, I think what's easy for me is to identify is that there's no like citations or there's not saying anything like according to. So it is based on someone's opinion that they're saying that.
It also says, like in the first 3 words, I feel. So that's like a dead giveaway just for anybody in the future. If you see something like that, that's like basically saying my opinion is I feel.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Wow, Amanda.
Don't jinx me.
So this says, while the rate of second-time imprisonment for murder is lower than 1%, other violent crimes have a higher rate and have had a greater effect on the community for crime itself. Drug charges, on the other hand, pose less of a threat, in addition to driving under the influence at 9%. And there is a citation that says Henslin 2020.
Yeah, but whoever wrote that, they didn't write that very, very good.
Yeah. So again, this one has like a citation. So even though there were some errors in it, there is like direct evidence and statistics that just prove the point that like, okay, here's 9% of these people are dealing with this, and then the citation to go along with it.
Right. So they're comparing the two, but they're not necessarily. They're like that's one of those things where they let the facts speak for themselves, where you can kind of compare the percentages.
Mm-hmm. So this says, if the minimum wage has to continue to increase, then individuals could better support themselves and their families with jobs that are more secure and provide a decent income. the salary increase could be complemented by the increase in job opportunities and access to higher education to create better job opportunities for low-income individuals. So for this one, it uses the word if, which I think is kind of one of those words getting to the idea of precision that it's sort of like suggesting that something could happen in the future without totally knowing for sure if something could happen. So there's no like citations or no evidence of proving that that could be the case. So when would you use fact-based writing? Woohoo. When would you use subjective writing? What type of writing are the words below likely to be found in? So the words are delicious, interesting, misguided, uninspiring, horrible. What is precision and what type of writing is it commonly used in? Okay, the last one. What can you do to separate fact from opinion in a report? Yeah, so for this one, it's avoid documenting your thoughts, just because fact-based writing would refrain from using your own opinions, usually. Yay, Francesca. Does anyone have any questions or anything?